We're joined by the executive director of Soy Canada. It is Brian Innes. Brian, great to chat with you.
You bet, Sean. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, well, hey, last week was the AGM for Soy Canada. What were some of the big outcomes of that meeting?
Yeah, well, it was a big meeting. It's our 10th anniversary this year, and so we did something special to go to a farm in northern Manitoba. So we had several dozen folks out at Sersky Farms to really reflect back on the 10 years that has been since Soy Canada was formed, and also think about where we want to go in the future.
Is it 10 years already? That is
It,
amazing.
time flies.
Wow. Okay. So you're at the Sersky farm and probably quite adjacent to a soybean field. What were some of the big issues, and what do you see as some of those priorities in the go forward?
Yeah. So is top of mind for farmers is always the weather today. And so in northern Manitoba, they've had double the amount of rain as normal, which creates a lot of risk for farmers, obviously. And so the reflection was how soybeans fit into a rotation that far north. And part of it is the joke that when it rains, the other crops suffer, but soybeans just keep drinking. And so that was the context where we were, where there's a lot of acres still not yet seeded in northern Manitoba, but yet for soybeans, it works well on that farm in particular. I think also when we reflect on where we are, there's interesting questions ahead of the industry on where we want to go together. When soybeans was formed 10 years ago, it was really about how the industry comes together across the country and across the value chain to do things that any one segment couldn't do on their own, or if they could, it would cost them more to do so. And so when we came together last week, it was about here we are. Wow, this has been amazing over the last 10 years. But where do we want to go from here? And that's where conversations around gene editing came up, conversations around protein and quality in Western Canada, and also conversations about how we want to work together to prevent trade issues.
Do you still see the potential for major acreage expansion in soybeans in Western Canada like we did a number of years ago? Is that still possible?
It's not just possible, it's actually likely. And it's likely because the varieties are continuing to get better. And also, farmers are generally seeing more heat and longer growing seasons, which means that for them to manage their risk and take advantage of that growing season, adding a crop like soybeans into the rotation can really help. I think where the industry's come in the last 10 years is to be more realistic that soybeans are a crop that thrives with heat and moisture. And so, looking at Western Canada, areas on the black soil zone when they're in a wet trend make a lot of sense for farmers.
Yeah, that does make sense. Now, you mentioned gene editing, and I'm curious, this is something that the industry has been fighting for and pushing for, and of course now is possible as of recently in Canada. What role does gene editing play in the development of varieties and soybeans in Canada?
Great question, Sean. We reflected on that, and what I would share with you is there's really two thoughts. On the one hand, Canada is a small part of the global market for soybeans, whether that's genetics or exports. And so naturally, one might think if you're going to commercialize something, you're going to do it in a place that has a lot more soybeans. On the other hand, Canada has a real advantage in a world-leading identity preserve system. So in the world that we see, where we've got small, medium, and even some large companies investing in soybean genetics through gene editing, they're able to produce a soybean that would meet particular market needs. And in Canada, we're really well set up to keep that separate, to deliver it to the customer and not prevent risk for the rest of the soybean industry.
So you see gene editing playing a role in Canadian soybean production?
Well, absolutely. And I think how it rolls out will really be driven by market demand. And so today there's been a lot of announcements, but not a real crystallization of market demand. But we know, for example, that our Canadian seed companies have gene edited genetics in their pipeline. And so when we look out, if we take an example of what we're able to do with gene editing to increase protein in soy, that has real advantages for the food grade industry, for example. And so when we look at markets in Southeast Asia that can be delivered in a container for a channel customer who wants higher quality, higher protein levels in their soy and can get that at a competitive advantage through a gene editing variety that works better for farmers and doesn't have as much premium associated with it, for example. Those are real opportunities for us. We have 18 exporters around the table at Soy Canada and a real opportunity to use our 40,000 containers a year that we export in soybeans to channel it to the customers who would value that.
Yeah, because in the pulse sector, there's been some recent discussion about, caution that, we don't want to disrupt exports and creating disruption because there would be gene edited varieties, even though they are not GM. Uh, there seems to be some caution, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm not necessarily as detecting that from a soybean perspective from you.
Well, the caution is to make sure that we can continue to export organic soy, non-GM soy, identity preserved soy, as well as GM soy to places like Europe and China that may not approve these gene-edited varieties in the near term. So that is a real caution for all of the grain industry. Where we come at it from in the soybean industry is that we are experts at identity preservation. We do that right now with about 1.3 million tons of non-GM soy. We have 100 varieties of food-grade soy that we deliver that specific variety from the farm to the processing plant to the customer. So we have a real strength here, and when we commercialize gene-edited soy, it will really be driven by that market demand.
You mentioned trade disruption previously as one of the things that Soy Canada is working on. What are the I guess what are the main files when it comes to trade disruption right now in regards to Canadian soybeans?
Well, great question, Shaun. We spend a lot of time in the Indo-Pacific. We just had our annual mission to Japan and Thailand this year. And so it's simple things like how we can get electronic phytosanitary certificates to keep up with our cousins to the south. That's sounds like a easy thing to fix, but when you're working with government, things can sometimes take more time than you like. Also, when we're looking at how other risks in the Indo-Pacific, whether it's weed seeds or plant disease, are managed in Southeast Asia, and we're continuing to engage with those countries through the Indo-Pacific Agriculture Office to proactively manage those and prevent them from creating risk and stopping our exports.
So digital phytosanitary certificates, what if the Americans have them and Canada does not, and why not?
Great question, Shaun. Well, sometimes it just takes government a long time to put new systems in place. I think we've
Well,
seen
but hey, well,
that.
the U.S. has government too, and the industry is massively bigger. So you're trying to get a lot more cats herded in that regard. So that you think smaller industry would be able, this would be simpler, or am I not looking at this appropriately?
Well, we agree with you, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're coming together as a grain industry, including ourselves and the Western Grain Elevator Association and others, to take a concerted approach with government alongside the Canada Grains Council. I think that was also part of the nature of our discussion last week was sometimes we have issues that are soybean specific, but many times they cross commodities. And so how we work with others through the Grains Council, for example, presents a real opportunity for us. So to your question, we're not quite sure why Canada's having such a difficult time, but we're working on it.
Well, hey, Brian, congratulations on the 10 years. If I had to, time flies because if I was to bet, I would have said 6 to 8. So 10 blows me away. So congratulations on 10 years of soybean or Soy Canada, I should say. It's that's quite the milestone. And there is obviously, like as you've indicated and laid out, a bright future for soybeans in Canada going forward.
Yeah, we're really seeing it. There's a lot of optimism around the table, around the board table, and with our members. So I don't think we've ever had a time where people have been so engaged in what we can do together. So that's exciting for a person like myself to come to work and work for the success of the industry 10 years and hopefully a lot longer than that into the future.
Yeah, great stuff. Hey, Brian, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Shaun.